When's the last time you bought a AAA game? Was it Forspoken or Skull and Bones? I think for me, before Sonic Shadow Generations, yes, I caved and bought it, shut up. It was Tears of the Kingdom. And the reason why it's been so long since I've bought a AAA game is because I've kind of checked out of the whole AAA release cycle. I don't know if you've noticed, but games have been getting more and more expensive and dropping more and more in quality. And there is one crowd who is 100% confident that they know the answer as to why.
Guess what? Fucking pronouns!
So let's talk about that. With the rate in which dog shit has been entering the gaming space lately, I've had to redefine for myself, for my own decision-making purposes, what constitutes as a AAA title. I consider a AAA title to be any game that comes out where the developers do not have the primary decision-making power of their game. I do make Nintendo exempt from this rule, but we'll get to that. Don't you worry. I'll explain. I'll explain why I do that. So where some people would consider Baldur's Gate 3 to be a AAA title or an indie AAA title, I just call them an indie title because Larian Studios has the full decision-making power in that. They're independent. INDEPENDE. Helldivers 2 is another banger title that came out this year that I would almost consider to be indie, but unfortunately they did have to lean on Sony to publish, and Sony fucked them after crossing the finish line. Gamers have been correctly calling out bigger gaming companies for doing shit just for the money, but right when they're on the precipice of a valid criticism, they take a wild Tokyo Drift-ass turn into blaming wokeness, whatever that means, to whoever is crying about it at the time. This critique alone has a litany of problems with it, but putting that aside, this whole anti-woke movement is never going to get taken seriously or gain any traction in improving the state of the gaming industry because it's just not a valid critique. See, I used to work in the restaurant industry. I was a bartender for many, many years, served for some of those as well. And when you work in the industry, you inevitably come across that guest who will look at you and say, I didn't like it, the food was bad. And if you're good at your job, you want to fix the problem, so naturally you're going to ask, okay, well, what was wrong with it? Oh, I don't know. I just didn't like it. It was bad. Okay, well, like, what was bad about it? Was it too salty? Did it come out cold? Is it, like, underdone? Is it overdone? Like, what? I don't know. It just wasn't for me. In those situations, I would turn to the customer and say, well, you didn't say anything when I checked up on you. You ate the whole thing, so I'm charging you for the whole thing. Goodbye. See you later. Bring a valid critique next time. See ya. Bye. And inevitably they'd ask for the manager and the manager to come out and like, listen, I worked in fine dining and like fine dining adjacent things, and those managers are much more likely to tell the customer the equivalent of fuck off. Like that Gordon Ramsay shit is not a meme. That's the norm. Saying something is bad is not a valid critique. It gives the person nothing to work with, no problem to solve. Using woke as a fallback criticism is pretty much one-to-one with that same situation, except it's worse because woke actually means something outside of the criticism. So when you ask an anti-woke gamer why a game was bad, and they tell you, well, like the writing sucked, and you're like, okay, what was it about the writing? And they're like, oh, well, you know, it's woke. And it's like, what do you mean by that? Was it campy? Was it like hacky? Did everybody sound like a secondhand knockoff Wish version of Tony Stark? What was wrong with it? The response is always like, well, you know, it was just like woke. So when you get into this loop and you can't provide any deeper criticisms and your fallback is a word that's associated with the representation of underrepresented people, people are going to think you don't like representation. People are going to call you a bigot. If you want a valid criticism that points to the actual tangible problems that can't be fixed, well, get your fucking Blue's Clues ass notepads out, because I'm about to lay one down on you that you can apply to every shitty AAA title that's been coming out recently. Mergers, company acquisitions, and the shoddy flipping and recycling of beloved IP to turn a profit by any means necessary is what's ruining the gaming industry. These suits at the top level do not give a fuck about representation. They give a fuck about lining their pockets. There is no fat cat, old white man investor who hasn't seen his kids in 40 years and his penis in 62 and his ivory tower is screaming, we gotta make the games gay. It's time to play Who Fucked That Game. Oh, yeah, I love this game. Oh, it's my favorite.
Price is Right. Who needs Price is Right? Suck my ass.
Rocksteady puts out Batman Arkham Asylum in 2009, a smash success, and Warner Brothers decides to take a majority stake in the company in 2010. The first full development cycle that takes place with the new ownership is Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Probably Monsters gets created by ex-Bungie CEO, and they come out the gate swinging by earning $200 million. How did they do that, you ask? Was it game sales? No! Investor funding and a partnership with Sony. How did that turn out for them? All three of Probably Monster Studios get shut down, and they only managed to put out one game that also gets shut down. Bethesda, a studio that positioned themselves to have a nearly untouchable reputation, then uses their consumer trust to pump microtransactions into games like Fallout 76 and Elder Scrolls Online, all while selling Skyrim over and over and over and over again. Then Microsoft buys their parent company, owning Bethesda and whatever is left of their reputation, and follow that up with Starfield. Skull and Bones, the first quadruple A game title made by Ubisoft. Now, Ubisoft has been getting bullied by big money since 2003 when EA bought 20% of their company in a move that Ubisoft described as hostile, an effort to minimize them as a competitive force, and EA responded with, "Who, me?" After that, Ubisoft said, "You know what, fuck it, me too." And they went on to buy the Driver series, Tom Clancy's name and intellectual property, started buying studios up left and right, including Massive Entertainment, a studio that Activision was throwing away just because they could. And then Ubisoft makes Massive put out a game based on James Cameron's Avatar, a $70 game that came out to a resounding Alright, and since I brought up EA, let's talk about EA. Because up until just recently, EA never got slapped with the title woke. And yet nearly every gamer knew if EA had its hands in a game's development cycle, it was likely fucked. And I think it's because EA hopped on the moral bankruptcy train real quick and didn't hide it. They started screwing over their consumers fast and hard. This was before wokeness was a thing, so they were correctly diagnosed as what they were: money-hungry corporate shills. I think it also has something to do with EA's two biggest demographics. They have a huge casual, like cozy gamer type of audience with games like The Sims and like SimCity, and then the other side of their demographic is the sports bros who buy the same game every year, sometimes twice a year. And listen, we're all a little brain dead here, you know? But those guys, well, they're a very special brand of brain dead. So my conclusion here is, the more big money hands in the pot, the more likely you're gonna end up with a dog shit release. And I know by this point some of you are kicking back in your chair going, "Oh, here we go, it's another capitalism bad argument," which yes, it is. But I want to actually unpack and elaborate on the capitalism bad argument and how it actually directly affects the games you love. Oh, yeah. All right, sick. Good to be in the AC. We are taught that lucrative industries under capitalism grow, and gaming is a very lucrative industry. So yes, the gaming industry has exploded. So how then is capitalism killing the gaming industry? I think the issue with trying to communicate with this crowd and much of the Western population about why capitalism is quickly sending us into a dystopia is that when people bring up these arguments, depending on who you're talking to, they're not really articulating how exactly it's doing it. They just say capitalism bad or capitalism is a lie. But the thing is, no one's lied to you about capitalism. They've just given you a half-truth. They've given you half the story. The half-truth that we're sold is that in the capitalist free market, industries that have sufficient demand will be successful, and successful industries introduce competition, which then breeds innovation. And when you end the sentence there, it makes sense. It all sounds reasonable, but that's not the end of the sentence. There's a big old but at the end of it. And the but is competition is not welcome. In a capitalist structure of society, competing is not lucrative. Dominating is. Because if you have an industry with demand and you're the only supplier, you could put out shoddy product after shoddy product because that's what makes you the most money, and where the fuck else is the consumer gonna go? You want a sports game with all your favorite players from the current season? Where you gonna go? You want a game centered around a DC comic book character? Who's competing in that space? If you want a big budget, big team, expansive game with impressive graphics, you only have a few places to choose from, and the only innovation taking place there is finding new ways to shut each other out of the market, shut down newcomers from entering the market, and new ways to exploit developers to make a product as cheap as possible but sell it at the same price. At the top of the video, I gave you how I personally define what constitutes as a AAA title versus an indie title, and if you remember, I said Nintendo is exempt from this rule. Since Nintendo has majority in their own company and pretty much all of their studios only make first-party Nintendo titles, under my own definition this would technically make them an indie developer. But I don't count them as independent because they still do AAA shit. While they don't engage as much with the mergers and the corporate acquisitions, Nintendo is number one when it comes to shutting down newcomers that could even give them a whiff of competition. They consistently send cease and desist. They shut down fan games that aren't making any money in the first place, and they will sue anyone they can if they start making any waves in a market that Nintendo plays in. They even make it difficult for creators to make content centered around a Nintendo video game because they think when people are watching a game, they aren't going to go out and buy the game, when in reality, if you look at the data, it's literally the exact opposite. It's free promotion. I'm making this video because I just want the gaming community to stop crying woke and just call it like it is. Money and corporate interests are fucking our favorite hobby. Because the thing is, we are more likely to unite as one front and make the gaming industry better if we do it under an objective truth as opposed to some vague, amorphous, hateful political agenda. And if that works, then who knows? Maybe we can work together to better other aspects of our lives that are being fucked for the same reason. I don't know, fucking crazy idea. Anyway, if you like what you're hearing, give me a chat below with the sub button, thumbs up button, tell me you know it was Cho. You know, I'm gonna get fucking raked over the coals for this one. You know, at least be consistent with your accidental anti-capitalist critique. Like, airlines now have microtransactions in the form of checked baggage. It's well, hardware gets shipped with built-in compatibility issues. So if you buy a third-party peripheral, it's a bitch to connect. Woke garbage. Get it out of here. Get that shit out of here. Apple intentionally making communicating with Android fucking an awful experience to convince you that Android is an inferior product. Woke as hell. So woke. So let's take a look at some of the recently terrible AAA titles so we could really see how their parents failed them. They just like me, for real, for real.